Business Book Summaries. Welcome to Business Book Summaries. Today, I'm thrilled to introduce you to Dale Carnegie's timeless masterpiece, How to Win Friends and Influence People. This book, which has been captivating readers since its debut in 1936, has crossed language barriers, amassing a staggering 150 million copies in sales worldwide. Regarded as a publishing miracle, it has left an indelible mark on human communication. At first, let me tell you a story about myself. Reading How to Win Friends and Influence People was a turning point in my life. As an introvert, social interactions used to make me anxious. But the book's advice on smiling, listening, and genuine communication struck a chord with me. I started practicing these principles, and the results were remarkable. People responded more positively, and I formed meaningful connections effortlessly. In my professional life, I became a better team player and communicator. The book not only boosted my social skills, but also my confidence. With time, I grew into someone who embraced social gatherings and even public speaking. I shared Carnegie's wisdom, inspiring others to improve too. This book didn't just teach me skills, it transformed me into a more confident and influential individual. Yet, like any work, it has its critics. Some argue that the book lacks profound insights. This raises a question: why does a book from over 80 years ago still hold such sway? What relevance does it have for us today? In our contemporary landscape, an array of self-management and interpersonal communication books abound. They take diverse approaches delving into theory, offering practical strategies, adopting psychological viewpoints, or exploring sociological aspects. However, Dale Carnegie was the trailblazer. His writings, penned a century ago, set the stage for these discussions. Every subsequent discourse on personal growth and communication builds upon Carnegie's foundational insights. We're inundated with theories and techniques for personal development and effective communication. But when we want to trace these ideas back to their origin, how to win friends and influence people is where it all begins. Reading a profound book is akin to engaging in a conversation with an intriguing mind. Beyond its significance, this book serves as a portal into Carnegie's thoughts. Dale Carnegie isn't merely a prominent American speaker and writer. He devoted his life to keenly observing and understanding human behavior, the bedrock of his life's work. As we delve into the pages of this book, we gain access to Carnegie's intellectual legacy. His research wasn't just about theories. He took practical knowledge from psychology and sociology, mixed it with communication skills and ways to deal with people. Nowadays, people like learning throughout their lives, and we call it adult education. But back in the 1920, Carnegie had already started schools for grown-ups. Even today, you can find Carnegie schools all around the world. That's why he's known as the dad of modern American adult education. Because of all this, it's really valuable to dig into Carnegie's ideas and stories. And now, let's start exploring his book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. The first part of the book talks about what's inside it. We'll get a clear understanding of basic ideas from this classic about how people interact. We'll find out about principles that have worked for a really long time. In the second part, we'll focus on Dale Carnegie himself. We'll think about why How to Win Friends and Influence People is still so popular. To understand that, we'll learn about Carnegie's background. In the third part, we'll put the spotlight on the main ideas. We'll look at other things Carnegie wrote to see if his beliefs and methods are the same throughout. So let's get started by opening the book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. Get ready to explore and learn. This book gives us a clear guide, like a map, starting from basic social skills and going all the way to getting people to like us, then leading and even changing them. This journey fits with the two important ideas in the title: how to win friends and how to influence people. Let's start with winning friends. This means actively trying to make friends. It's like when you go out to play, the important thing is to take the first step. Many people show their best side to make friends. But more than 100 years ago, Carnegie noticed this way might not work. Think about the word you hear most in daily talk. A study found that out of 500 phone calls, the word "I" was used 3,900 times. It's natural to focus on ourselves. Some people might tell funny stories about themselves, show how good they are, or even be nice to help others. These things can make a good impression, but Carnegie believed they could lead to a regular life, always wanting others to like us. Carnegie's idea is different. He said the real way to make friends is to care about others. This taps into a deep human need to be seen and valued. This idea is one of the main things you'll learn in how to win friends and influence people. But how can you truly care about others? In this classic about dealing with people, Carnegie not only talks about this idea, but also gives practical information, like keeping a smile, remembering names, and being genuinely interested in others. You might recognize these things, but it's important to know that a man figured all this out more than 100 years ago. Carnegie always gave real-world examples along with these techniques. For instance, he'd ask people if they believed in astrology, not because he cared about it, but so he could smoothly ask about their birthdays. He'd remember those dates and send them warm wishes. Imagine getting friendly messages from someone you hardly know. It naturally makes you like them. Showing care can happen in different ways. Some people talk enthusiastically about various topics, but Carnegie believed the best way to care was by listening. Once, at a dinner with a botanist, even though Carnegie didn't know much about plants, the botanist later praised him for being engaging and a great conversationalist. What did Carnegie do? He simply listened closely. Listening might seem small, but it's powerful. Few can resist someone who pays full attention. But Carnegie is clear that your interest has to be real. Pretending won't work. Reading Carnegie's words is like chatting with a friend. The examples he talks about are like situations we face in real life. His ideas are short and clear, and the techniques he suggests are easy for anyone to try. This gives us hope for change. Instead of feeling overwhelmed, we see a way forward, even when things seem tough. Even though Carnegie's books might seem simple, they work really well in real life. Maybe that's the magic of being genuine. We just talked about how to make friends. Carnegie's big idea is to truly care about others. Making friends is just the start. To go further, we need to influence others. Carnegie once said that success isn't just about what you know. Technical stuff is only 15%. The other 85% comes from how well you deal with people. Carnegie strongly believes that how we get along with people really matters. It can affect our job and our whole life. So how can we influence others in our everyday life? Well, usually we try to convince them by making them feel something or by giving them logical reasons. Carnegie himself was a great public speaker. He grew up in Missouri, where a saying goes, "Show me." He often used his speaking skills to get others to see his point of view. But this way usually ended in arguments. Sometimes, even if it didn't get really heated, both sides would still stick to their own ideas. Carnegie learned from these experiences that arguing doesn't really make anyone a winner. So, it seems that convincing someone might not be the best way to get them on your side. Then, what works better? Carnegie liked the idea that our actions are based on deep human wishes. Whether in business, family, or anywhere else, the best way to get someone to agree is to touch on what they really want. There's a story in the book about Andrew Carnegie, who was a big steel businessman in the USA. He had two nephews at Yale University who rarely wrote to their family, even ignoring letters from their mom. Their mom was really sad about this. Andrew bet $100 that he could get his nephews to reply without directly asking them. Someone took the bet, and Andrew wrote a letter to his nephews. He mostly talked about small things, but at the end, he casually said he was sending them $5. But he didn't actually put the money in the letter when he sent it. And guess what? The nephews wrote back right away, thanking their uncle for the letter and being very appreciative. You can imagine how the rest of the letter went. We often talk about leadership. Does having a high position, a lot of power, and plenty of resources mean you're a strong leader? Leadership is about getting people to work together to achieve goals. It's not just about having power, but about solving problems. So, if you want to lead or influence others, don't rush to show off or make big promises. People don't like feeling controlled. We want freedom. So, before trying to influence others, think about how to get them interested in the task or motivate them to do it willingly. However, making others see things your way can take time. So, how can you influence and motivate them? The book talks about a method called the Socratic secret. It's about getting the other person to say yes right from the start and not giving them a chance to say no. For example, there's a story about a guy named Eddie who liked bow hunting. He called a store to rent some equipment, but ended up buying it. How did this happen? The store clerk was polite and explained they didn't rent stuff anymore. The clerk asked if Eddie had rented from them before, and he said yes. Then they talked about prices, and Eddie confirmed he could afford it. The clerk pointed out a discounted offer, and Eddie ended up buying. He became a loyal customer. So, in How to Win Friends and Influence People, Carnegie talks about two things humans worry about: not being noticed and not being free. We all want to be recognized and valued. To make friends, we should genuinely care about others. Another desire is to have control and not feel restricted. To influence others, we should tap into their desires and make them want to do things. One smart way is to ask questions that get them saying yes. Reading How to Win Friends and Influence People is a rich experience. Some say those who faced challenges can really understand its depth. How did Carnegie write such a book? Why was it so popular? Let's take a different approach and learn about the author's life story. We'll step into that special time and understand how to win friends and influence people better. But a few years later, in the United States, something terrible happened. It was the 1929 economic crisis. The housing market crashed, and this led to a chain reaction affecting both money matters and the real world. People lost confidence in their lives. And during this difficult time, Carnegie's book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, came out. At first, he meant it to be a textbook. He put a lot of effort into it. He studied lots of psychology stuff, read many magazine articles, and even talked to successful people like President Roosevelt. When this crisis hit, Carnegie's book was like a light in the dark. It made many Americans feel better and more hopeful. Why did everyone like this book so much? Carnegie had many famous quotes, but one that's well known is "Believe you can succeed, and you will." The New York Times once said that Carnegie was like a symbol of America. This wasn't just empty praise. Carnegie's life was a lot like the lives of other Americans during that time. He was born when things were getting better, fought in World War I, and lived through the Great Depression. But overall, during the late 1800 and early 1900, America was changing really quickly. People were feeling positive, and the American spirit was strong. That generation of Americans were brave, taking risks and chasing their dreams, believing that hard work would pay off. So, a book like How to Win Friends and Influence People was really needed. It had ideas, stories, ways to do things, and quotes that inspired people to go for their dreams and beat problems. Even today, the book still lights a fire in people's hearts and gives them hope. That's why it's a publishing success. Carnegie wrote more than 10 books in his life. Along with How to Win Friends and Influence People, many of his other books have smart ideas and simple ways to do things that still make sense for us today. He was always focused on understanding how people work. For example, another famous book of his is How to Stop Worrying and Start Living, published in 1948. It's a bit long, but it's about one big thing: how to deal with being anxious. Carnegie didn't just give answers right away. He first talked about a big idea. Why do people in modern times get so worried? He said, it's because we try to make decisions quickly, without really understanding the problem. This is something everyone does, because it's how our minds work. We want to decide things as fast as possible, with as little effort as we can, often without even realizing it. This instinct was helpful long ago, when people needed to save energy and stay safe. But now, in modern life, it can make us act too quickly without thinking, or we might not be able to think calmly at all. When we can't think clearly, we start feeling anxious. And when anxiety grows, it causes worries. To deal with this, the first step is to understand why we get anxious and figure out why we worry. Carnegie suggests 4 questions to ask ourselves when we're troubled at work. We should write down the answers. What's the problem bothering me? How did this problem come up? What are some ways to fix it? Which solution seems best, and what are its good and bad sides? But we can't just wait for problems to show up and then deal with them. We have to stop worrying too much in the first place. Carnegie gives us useful information for this. First, stay busy to avoid overthinking. Second, don't stress about little things. Third, use the idea of probability. Think about how likely something is to actually happen before you worry about it. If the chance is low, try to let it go. If you can't avoid it, find ways to handle it. Fourth, if you need to worry, give yourself a time limit, like half an hour. Then, move on. Lastly, don't dwell on the past. Once something is done, focus on now, because you can't change the past. Carnegie also talks about creating good habits to lessen worries. Like, when you start your day, get yourself ready, and when you start working, organize your desk and keep only what you need. Also, do important things first to avoid piling up tasks. That's it for How to Win Friends and Influence People. But remember, Carnegie wasn't just a writer. He was a master at understanding how people work, and he was amazing at teaching public speaking. He didn't just talk about speaking skills like how to use your voice or pick the right words. He started from understanding human nature, and that made his teachings even more powerful. For example, in his book, The Art of Public Speaking, he says it's not only about what you say, but how you say it. Some people think having good ideas is enough, even if they don't speak loudly or clearly. But Carnegie says that how you say things matters more. There are speakers who talk well but can't connect with the audience. Carnegie says the key is to speak in a way that respects the listener's feelings. Communication is like a one-on-one chat, even if it's to a big audience. To make your words matter, you need to make the listeners feel respected. Starting from here, we've learned about a lot of speaking skills, like changing our tone based on who's listening, Carnegie thinks great speakers should sound like they're having a chat. But this doesn't just mean the way you talk, it's also about the examples you pick, how you act, how relaxed you seem, and more. Imagine you're speaking to a group of neighbors. You should sound like you're talking to friends. Speak about things they care about, like the community and family stuff. But if you're talking to salespeople, you should sound like you're talking to colleagues. Discuss business things they understand, like market trends and work pressure. So, the difference between good and bad speakers isn't really what they say. It's in how they talk. Can they make it feel like a normal, interesting chat? Speaking like you do in regular life. Of course, this takes practice. Carnegie tells us that many folks who practice speaking mess up by copying others. Copying can help you mimic skills, but it's not how communication should work. Imagine this. Would you rather listen to a concert or a speech? You'd probably pick the concert. Most speeches seem the same, and when you see speakers, some might feel awkward. That's often because people practice by copying others. Carnegie believes a good speech is good communication. You need to speak from your heart and be yourself. He talked about a practice trick. Imagine the audience standing up and talking with you. How would you chat with them? Keep that feeling in mind while you practice. Your speaking will get better over time. Imagine someone asks you a question. Repeat it and answer like you're talking to a friend. This natural way of speaking is warmer and more personal than trying to sound fancy. Because of time limits, we can't cover more speech TIPs. But Carnegie's books have plenty. Today, we talked mainly about how to win friends and influence people. It's a book with a strong history. It arrived during a time when the U.S. was getting over a big economic problem and becoming powerful in the world. It met the needs of regular Americans back then who wanted to make their dreams come true. This book's ideas have stayed powerful even after a long time. Carnegie mixed psychology and sociology ideas to build a solid foundation for personal growth and talking with people. It's made a big impact. The points in the book might not shock you, but the real-life stories and practical advice make it warm and helpful. This book has been a friend to countless people over the years. Carnegie's message at the start of this book is for anyone who wants to keep growing. When you read this book or any other about personal growth, don't just gather knowledge. Work on building new habits and shaping a fresh outlook on life. But doing this takes time, determination, and ongoing effort in your everyday life. So, when we talk about how to win friends and influence people, we might just be starting. The real practice part is something you'll have to do. I hope Carnegie's ideas will give you strength every day in the future. That's everything I shared with you today. Thank you, and have a wonderful day. If you enjoyed this summary, please consider subscribing to the Business Book Summaries channel.